All right. Thanks everyone for being here. Welcome. Okay, good morning. I'm Jen Hoskins. I'm the head of cloud partnerships for Inception, that is NVIDIA's startup program. Excited to welcome you to this session here at Ignite. We have three amazing pioneering startups with us today. We're in both the NVIDIA Inception Program as well as the Microsoft for Startups program. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
So in this session, we'll talk a little bit about your experience as a startup. We'll talk about your technology and your experience in the Inception program as well as within Microsoft for Startups. So if you're new to NVIDIA Inception, it is our free global program with over 20,000 startups from more than 100 countries. We provide startups at all stages access to critical tools and resources to accelerate innovation, scale business, and bring ideas to market. So as our partner, Microsoft and NVIDIA Inception launched our partnership, starting first with healthcare and life sciences just last month. All right, so if you're in the audience, we'll get us started with a QR here. And you're in, there we go. If you haven't heard of Inception and Microsoft for Startups and you'd like to join or hear more about the programs, please scan the QR to learn more. We'll also be here after the sessions if you have questions, and you can also visit us at booth 400. Okay, so enough from me. If you could please start by introducing yourself and your company. Lauren.
You got it. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. It's great to be here today. My name is Lauren Nemeth. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Pinecone. Pinecone is a leading vector database solution committed to making AI more knowledgeable. And so what that means is we have an industry-leading vector database product. We have an inference solution, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, as well as an assistant product. It's great to meet you.
And I'm Andrew Gostine. I'm a physician here in Chicago at Northwestern Medicine and the founder and CEO of Artisight. So Artisight makes computer vision and ambient voice monitoring systems for acute care and subacute care hospital facilities. We use those systems to monitor patients and then use the data from them to drive prediction engines to enhance the monitoring we turn on for patients.
Yes, very good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jen and NVIDIA, for this opportunity. My name is Vibhor. I trained in oncology. I'm not a practicing physician anymore. I'm in research. Been working in medicine and computing for about 24 years. I'm the founder of a business called Pangea Data, and we provide a product platform to physicians in healthcare and in the pharmaceutical industry to help find untreated patients. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along.
Fantastic, thank you. And thank you again for being here. Okay, let's start with an icebreaker, starting slow. What is the most exciting AI trend you think of right now? Mine is chatbots arguing with each other. It's kind of like a soap opera, but for tech nerds. So please, go ahead.
Well, that's a good one, though. I don't know if I have one as like juicy as that, maybe. I mean, I think that one of the exciting trends is everyone has been so focused on RAG, probably for the last year and a half, which is great, but I think RAG is now maturing into like much more compelling use cases that are more ROI driven. So we're seeing a lot more agentic workflows, which has been really fun to see, both in terms of driving efficiency and productivity, but also net new revenue lines for a lot of our software ISV-based customers.
From the pure tech side of artificial intelligence, I'd have to say video language models. So just the amount of knowledge we can put into a video computer vision model will never get to its full potential unless we can find a faster way to teach them. And using either speech or text to teach a video model is going to be the way we get there.
Amazing. Vibhor?
I think from my perspective, it's the application of these generative AI approaches and large language models that I find very fascinating, because I think they have really allowed us to scale and, from an operational perspective, reduce the effort that typically would go into achieving the same kind of function that we are now able to do very easily with some of these Gen AI models.
That's great, thank you. All right, one more, quickly. If you could solve one problem in your industry instantly, what would it be? Go ahead, Lauren.
This is maybe controversial a little bit, but I think even if you look at like Satya's keynote, so much of it was talking about LLMs and all the models as they're coming out and what they're capable of doing, which is super great and super compelling. But I think at the end of the day, even if you look at each new iteration of models, they're kind of incrementally a little bit better, but not leaps and bounds as maybe we were hoping and expecting. What I'm most excited about is actually powering better knowledge. I mean, shameless plug, obviously, for Pinecone. But really to take all the unstructured data in the world, all the multimodal data, right? Whether it's voice-based data, text-based data, images, videos, you name it, and actually be able to leverage that for more knowledge, more accurate understanding to actually power those LLMs to basically eliminate hallucinations.
Please, Andrew.
I would say in healthcare is very boring. You know, we're still using pagers and fax machines. So I'd have to go with data entry. So if we could just eliminate data entry from every physician and nursing workflow, we'd be far ahead of where we are as an industry now.
Yeah, I would completely second that. You know, I mean, at the point of care, and I know this, you know, physicians spend a lot of time doing mundane work, let's put it that way, as opposed to what they should be doing, which is trying to think about the patient and what's going on with the patient. So if there are ways to automate those processes and those sort of get rid of those mundane activities in any shape or form, that'll be quite helpful. Not to forget that the administrative work for physicians has increased exponentially over the years, and you only have to look at the data and the regulations that have come in over the last 20 years to sort of signify, you know, how much more work the physicians have to do, which is just sort of robotic in many sense. The only other thing I would add to that, which would be on my wish list, is engaging patients. You know, because I'm sure there are people here who have relatives, and if you're a physician who would come to you asking, hey, we've got this report, what does this mean? You know, or what does all this information mean? So being able to engage patients in a manner so that they understand what's really going on, I think would be quite helpful for physicians and also for patients.
Absolutely. Why don't we continue on with that? We know AI is reshaping industries, it's creating new categories, it's changing things in dramatic ways, specifically with healthcare. We're seeing process optimization as one of the big changes, of course. So can you share a standout example of how your company has used AI to solve unique challenges, to deliver a breakthrough that wasn't possible previously?
Oh, yes. Well, two stories have been public. One is actually locally from the University of Illinois Cancer Center, which is one of the largest academic medical centers here in the country and also one of the larger cancer centers. Here we were working with Dr. 𝗦𝗽𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, who's the director. And we met almost 3 years ago when he had this idea suggesting that at least in his clinic, there were lots of patients who were diagnosed with breast, lung, or prostate cancer, but they were not receiving the guideline concordant therapy or treatment. To sort of drill down a little bit more on that, it would mean that some of these patients were not even being sent in for biomarker tests that we would normally do in the clinic. And the reasons were unknown. Like, you know, if you looked at the patient's record and the profile, you would easily suggest that, yes, these patients should have been sent in for the, you know, the relevant test, or they should have been put on X, Y, or Z therapy as the guidelines would prescribe. So his idea or his hypothesis was that there is implicit bias in the system somewhere, which sort of disadvantages patients based on their ethnicity or their demographics or social indicators. And that was very much a hypothesis at the time. And you know, the FDA since has come up with several regulations and sort of good practices for physicians to help address that. But there was never a way to measure. How would you measure implicit bias if there existed some, right? And how would you then be able to go back to a team of physicians and say, look, this is what we're looking at, and here is how we're going to solve it. And so his idea started with, okay, let's start by looking at the electronic medical records, much like what we would do in the clinic, and see if, number one, based on those medical records, we could ascertain if these patients should be, you know, what pathways should these patients be, and if there are care gaps, meaning that these patients are not on the right testing or the right treatment, then we bring them on that. So that was the first thing we did, and lo and behold, we found almost 40 to 50% more patients through this activity who were hidden in plain sight, meaning that they were diagnosed with any one particular type of cancer, but they were not receiving the right biomarker testing, or they were not on the right guideline concordant therapy. So that's almost 2 times the patients that a physician should be seeing were not being seen, essentially. The second thing, when we looked at their record, we could easily figure that there was indicators around their sort of social information, if I may. These are called social determinants of health, or sort of their backgrounds, their ethnicity, which suggested that actually a large population of these patients who were missed belong to that category. Now, correlation is not causation, right? But there was, at least for the first time, empirical evidence suggesting that, yes, there was a population of patients who were being, quote unquote, discriminated against in some shape or form. So now, at least, now with that information and with that empirical evidence, they are making a conscious effort to educate the physicians on the front line, to inform them about it and actually do something about it. And now this research is being taken further to measure allostatic load. So you can imagine it has huge impact for policymakers, for patients, but most importantly for physicians, because by the very definition of implicit bias, it's implicit. It's sort of subconscious, and if you can consciously address it, it leads to closing those care gaps, better care for the patients, but also less burden on the health system, because these patients will show up later on in their journey, meaning that they would need more beds, more resources, more nursing staff, but now you take all of that away earlier on in the journey.
Amazing. We will dig more into that in a bit. Andrew, over to you.
So just to give you a simple example of the things that we do, most hospitals in the United States pay what are called sitters to sit in a patient room to make sure patients don't get out of bed. These sitters are not allowed to touch a patient. They're just there to monitor the patient, and if something like a patient attempting to get out of bed occurs, they call a healthcare provider into the room to make sure the patient doesn't fall, put them back in bed. It's hard to figure out which patients are at risk. So one of the first things that 𝗦𝗽𝗀𝗀𝗧 does is we deploy a large language model that will continuously read a patient's medical record on-premise behind the health system firewall, or take that data, anonymize it, and send it up to the cloud for inferencing. We dynamically read what's happening to a patient, what drugs they're getting, to adjust their likelihood of falling in the next 12 or 24 hours. We then engage a video camera instead of a human in the room to now monitor that patient. If they attempt to get out of bed, we redirect them. If they ignore the redirection, we then send notifications to the staff in the same way that a sitter would call in staff. In doing that, we've scaled monitoring where one person or no person can monitor up to 300 patient rooms rather than trying to find 300 people to sit in 300 patient rooms. So for that, we've delivered massive ROIs. It's not a sexy problem. It's just one of the pieces of blocking and tackling that hospitals have to get done. Falls are a $50 billion problem in the United States, and if we can avoid that cost and send it to cancer research, we're all going to end up in a better place.
Absolutely. It's not sexy, but it affects everyone. So there's that. That's amazing. Lauren.
It's always hard to follow like healthcare people.
Yeah, I know.
Doing like the most important work, and I'll go back to what the developers are doing. But no, in all seriousness, I mean, I think historically, if you think of knowledge, right, a lot of people think of lexical knowledge, they think of graphical knowledge. So lexical meaning kind of traditional search, keyword-based understanding, graphical being more hard-coded in terms of relational. 90% of the world's information is actually unstructured in nature. So think of PDF files, right? There might be a text, there might be an image, there might be a graph. There's going to be a lot of different multimodals that you're going to need to have some level of understanding of. You know, historically, having a vector database that provides that understanding hasn't really existed, at least not commonly, for about the last 5 years or so. And I think what people have found is like, great, now that I can actually understand what's happening in a lot of these unstructured data sets, how do I quickly take action based upon that data? And so that's everything from how do I effectively integrate a re-ranker, an embedding model, how important is the latency in terms of the call time, because a lot of this data is constantly being refreshed and updated. Building more of like a serverless-based architecture where intentionally we have a data freshness layer to constantly make sure that that's accurate and up to speed. You can quickly then take action on that, provide some sort of generation, reasoning, et cetera. Historically, that's not been something that developers have been able to take action on. So I think unlocking that knowledge in the first place on 90% of the world's data but then secondly, doing that in a way that is really low latency, high throughput, high data freshness, so that developers in any use case, whether it's healthcare or, we work with oil and gas companies, we work with financial services companies, I mean, you name it, we have 5,000 net new developers sign up for Pinecone every single week.
Wow.
There's so many different ways that they're using these data sets. The power of knowledge and the speed by which they can do it is kind of what we're really excited about.
Absolutely, and it's hard to follow healthcare, but category creation is a big deal, so that was impressive, so thank you.
We work with healthcare companies.
Yes, that's right.
We're helping you.
So let's go back to healthcare for just a few minutes. Pangea Data and Artisight are both in the healthcare space, as we've heard, but you approach it at different angles. So Andrew, let's start with you. How do you see AI transforming patient care specifically in the next 5 years?
In the immediate future, the artificial intelligence capabilities that we're delivering and many others adjacent to us are really focused, like I said, on kind of data entry. A lot of problems in healthcare could be fixed if we just had data. So when we go into a healthcare system, we'll start working on our predictive engines and we'll ask them, like, please turn over a year's worth of data so we can see your historical trends. The last major academic center we did that for in Baltimore had 22% of the records they sent us with identifiable data corruption issues, like saying they had 2 different patients in the same operating room at the same time getting 2 different surgeries.
Oof.
We know that can't exist. So one of the things that we do is put our sensors in there to build very good data sets. In doing so, we remove that task completely from the frontline providers. If you look at most medical literature on workflows, you'll find that nurses and physicians get through maybe 60% of the tasks they're supposed to complete to take care of a patient. Getting the tasks of documentation, which yields horribly corrupt data, off the plate of the clinician so that they can complete tasks that actually yield value to the patient is going to be the major focus for the next 5 years of healthcare.
Absolutely, okay. Vibhor, to you.
Yes, from our perspective, we see the two sort of, a physician, a very senior physician told me this a few months ago. She said, we see AI bringing conflicting parties together. And I just want to ratify that with an example. We had a few pharmaceutical companies. We were founded 6 years ago. And just as we were founded, we presented one paper around the capabilities I mentioned, which was to review patient records using artificial intelligence methods, much like what we would do in the clinic. And that was in San Diego at a conference. And actually, the first person who came to us asking about it was a pharmaceutical company. They said, well, we would love for this to be scaled up across all hospitals. And my question to them was, why would you want that? I can see why hospitals would want that. And they said, well, you do realize that today, up to 80 to 90% of the patients are untreated or undertreated. Going back to my earlier example, meaning that there are sort of gaps in the care, as a result of which, while you have data for these patients are not receiving the due care, and they're not being taken along the treatment care pathway. And that means these pharma companies are losing 80, 90% of the revenue annually as a result of that, because nobody's benefiting from their therapies. More importantly, the clinical trials piece for them, which is a smaller piece of the pie. For that means that a lot of patients who could benefit from those trials, which from a physician standpoint is just another means to an end, are not receiving those benefits, right? So we said, okay, what would the nirvana look like for you? And they said, well, if we could have at least for the records that are available in electronic health record system, if we could process them, or if we could have physicians review them entirely cover to cover, and just make sure that all the care gaps are closed, that's all we want. Then we don't really need our sales guys to go and talk to physicians to help close these care gaps or identify and do epidemiological studies. So that was an interesting thought, going back 6 years ago. And then when we took it down to the physicians said, well, that's all very well and good, but we don't have the time. And we don't have the budget to do this. Like, I was just meeting somebody here from one of the large health systems in New York, and they said, every week, we get requests for 150 new use cases around AI from our physicians and from our admin staff. So they have a funneling process, but of course, there's a limit to that. So the point being that the time and budget on the healthcare side is very limited. So we came up with an interesting model almost 4 years ago where we said, okay, to pharma we said, would you be happy to fund if we were to deploy our product behind the firewall of these health systems? And you don't get to see any data because health systems can't do that. And you don't get to pay the health systems because the Sunshine Act and compliance is very strict around that. But what you get in return is what you were telling me is in nirvana, that the care gaps are closed and more patients are being treated. That's what you wanted. And they said, yes, we will do that. So we experimented that with a few health systems here in the United States. And lo and behold, today we have about 14 health systems waiting to go live with exactly that philosophy. So you see, when I started out, I wouldn't have imagined pharma and healthcare coming together like that. I mean, they've always worked on research studies, on drug discovery science projects, and these epidemiological studies, but nothing that would be implemented at the point of care. And I think that is a revolution in its own right, at least from my perspective, from the medicine and the perspective of research. So
absolutely.
Hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Andrew, let's continue on. One more question, healthcare specific. Probably no industry that could benefit more than healthcare for AI. How does Artisight help hospitals adopt AI?
So, hospitals last a long time. Some of the hospitals we're operating in were built 50 years ago. The first thing, and probably why NVIDIA's stock is doing so well, is because they need infrastructure. So we use these non-sexy use cases of preventing a patient fall with a camera as an opportunity to move a camera with a Jetson inside it that can perform a ton of edge compute. It gives them a platform for the next 30 use cases. One of the biggest problems in healthcare is an RFP can take 3 years. So if every time we identify a problem, we move at rapid pace to get through a 3-year RFP, then in 3 years, we'll solve problems from 3 years ago. You can't move that fast in healthcare and fix it. So using this fall problem or an OR throughput optimization problem as an opportunity to move the appropriate infrastructure for the next 10 or 20 years of smart hospitals is really kind of like this Trojan horse, but in a good way, of bringing the right infrastructure into healthcare.
Got it, thank you. Okay, Lauren, back to you, vector databases. How are developers using Pinecone's vector database for Gen AI applications, and what innovation and use cases are you seeing emerging?
Sure. Pinecone's been around for about 5 years. Over that period of time, we've had roughly 200,000 developers sign up for Pinecone. So we have like a vast array of different verticals, use cases, way in which sort of we've seen that evolve over the last 5 years. And so I think when that started, principally it was kind of like a search problem, right? I have a question, I want an answer, I want to have some level of understanding. That then evolved into co-pilots, assistants, different RAG applications, et cetera. I think where we now see that, and I think that's been really great for efficiency and productivity, right? So even as Microsoft has been talking a lot about this week, how do you make your workforce more efficient, more productive, more knowledgeable? Where that is very much now graduating is into more ROI-based use cases. So how does that move now into an agentic flow where you can actually replace human tasks that were occurring before by taking that information in real time and immediately leveraging that for some form of action? We continue to see all three of those principal use cases transpire on Pinecone today. But even in our workflow, we ask developers as they sign up, like, what are you actually trying to use Pinecone for? What is your core use case? That graduation of search into kind of co-pilots, assistants, and now into agentic is where we see the industry evolving. And I think for a lot of companies that we work with, GPUs aren't cheap, Pinecone isn't cheap, like all the tooling that we're building isn't cheap, kind of moving more towards how do I see an ROI, like a return on that investment, by actually replacing more knowledge workers.
That's great. Speaking GPUs are not cheap, let's talk tech adoption. So I've heard a little bit about NVIDIA tech adoption. I'd love to hear about how NVIDIA has helped you, how Microsoft for startups have helped you. How have these programs and these partnerships helped you from a growth perspective?
Yeah, so a few things. One, obviously from a GPU and compute perspective, we work with the various different types of GPUs from NVIDIA today. Obviously they're industry leading in that category. I mentioned a little bit before about how latency is such a critical issue that a lot of developers are facing today. So that is where we built our Inference product. The purpose of Inference is really to actually bring re-rankers and embedding models a lot closer to the database. There's a bunch of reasons in terms of why that's valuable. One, from just a compliance security perspective, but secondly, really from a latency perspective. So that's where we've worked with NVIDIA on TensorRT. It's actually now been able to speed up the time to actually execute those tasks by 3x, which is an amazing achievement. So our developers are deeply benefiting from that product, and that's largely because of our partnership with NVIDIA. On the partnership side too as well, we get such a great level of support, marketing, thought leadership in different ways that we can be using the NVIDIA products and also working with the broader ecosystem. So NVIDIA has been obviously very instrumental in terms of both our technology as well as go-to-market advancements.
Well, we appreciate you, and we appreciate Pinecone. So thanks for the partnership. Andrew?
I mean, the list is almost endless, all the way up through NVIDIA as an investor at Artesite. So we get a ton of support that way. I would say the biggest, and you'll have to actually correct me, I don't know if this is still true. When I last checked, NVIDIA had more software developers than hardware developers, I was told. We use a ton of NVIDIA SDKs, and when you're in Inception, you get a really better access to the people that wrote these SDKs.
Right.
So all of our computer vision is based on Triton Inference Server. And so we deploy that both in the cloud, at the edge, on our Jetsons, and in servers deployed behind the health system firewall. It is a way to do computer vision inferencing that is fully optimized for NVIDIA chips, and because we're exclusively on NVIDIA chips, it saves us a ton of development work. I would say that is by far and away the biggest aspect of being part of Inception is just getting access to the people that wrote the SDKs to tune it to your use case is a game changer.
Absolutely. We didn't pay him to say this. I don't know if I'm blushing or not, but that was beautifully put. Vibhor, anything to add?
Yes, no, we've been, firstly, thank you for having us as part of the Inception program. We've been part of it for I think 2 or 3 years now, since its first year, from what I remember. Yep. And I would second to what Laura and Andrew have already covered. The access to the resources from NVIDIA has been hugely beneficial for us. I'll just take an example of your NeMo and your BioNeMo, products which are these large language models that NVIDIA has trained on data that they had access to. BioNeMo is more for drug discovery now, but the NeMo product is very useful because, number one, they were able to set up these contracts with very large academic medical centers, on the back of which they were able to train these models and fine-tune them, which is hugely beneficial for a young business like us, because then we don't have to spend the money on our physicians to go through all of the outputs and also the inputs that go into these models to validate everything and to fine-tune them. That's just a very sort of tangible that I can pick up. But the intangibles have been the visibility. Every time we go into a room, as you can appreciate as a young business, talking to a major health system or a major pharmaceutical company, the likelihood of them working with NVIDIA or using NVIDIA GPUs, and also working with Microsoft is very, very high. So when you come across as a company which has been selected and gone through the screening process of something like Inception, it really helps build that credibility with people across the table and sort of set a level playing field in the sense that they're not judging you for who you are, but they're really judging you for what you are there to offer them.
Absolutely. Well, we take a lot of pride in the startups in our program, and we are really grateful that you're in it, and hope we can do more to help you and with you and partner and continue that. So thank you. So continuing on the lines, we have two founders here. So what advice would you give to startups looking to leverage similar partnerships? How do you get started?
From my perspective, it'll be just focus. Just focus and have a very clear idea of what exactly are you doing and how that would lead to customer success. And then work backwards from that, because then that'll make it very clear what you need from the partnership. Because as you've heard today, the partnership could have several different facets, right? From technical to function to business. So just be very laser focused on customer success. Because by the very definition of us being innovative or bringing something new to the market, there will be ups and downs mostly, and therefore, you really need to, just keep your eye on the ball and know exactly what you're going for there, and what you need from your partners to make it happen.
Anything from you?
Being a founder is almost impossible.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to discourage anyone from starting a company. It's an amazing experience, but even Elon will tell you it's like chewing glass and staring into the abyss. It's very hard. The fact that there are actually companies out there that will help you at no cost to you is a game changer. It's going to be different for everyone, the benefits you get from either Pegasus or Microsoft for startups or Inception. The only wrong thing to do is to not get started with them. Just sign up and figure out how your business, you're a founder because you like problem solving, figure out what resources they have to help you. It could be financing, could be access to their developers, cloud compute credits, which we've gotten both from Microsoft and NVIDIA. Though there's almost an endless list of things they can do to benefit, so figure out by signing up how to apply those benefits to your company.
Absolutely, appreciate that. The chewing glass one, I could really feel that. So, ouch. Lauren, you're at a startup as well.
Yeah.
Any advice for founders?
I just think partnerships is not a volume game, right? Doing fewer partnerships really well is critical. And so I think thinking about what is your business's purpose? What are you the best in the world at? Where are your customers today? So henceforth, if you're in AI, not working with NVIDIA or Microsoft, quite frankly, doesn't make any sense. Like they're two of the leading companies that you could be partnering with. And I think to the point of companies who are willing to help you, whether it's sales, marketing, technology, thought leadership, investments, I mean, you name it, there's so many ways in which both Microsoft and NVIDIA, I think, are really great partners. So I would sign up, get started, and really focus on what your better together story is. How are your technologies better together? How are your sales motions better together? And do a few really, really good partnerships well.
I would only add to that, just a crazy world running a startup. The comment about like focus on a few is so critically important. We actually had a choice early on in our company of working with Intel Capital, which I'm laughing about, or NVIDIA. And I remember talking to my co-founder being like, this is kind of a hard decision. But we started using more and more GPUs. We started doing more with the NVIDIA teams. And then ultimately, and this wasn't even publicly advertised at Inception at the time, we had the opportunity to make NVIDIA an investor who gave us phenomenal resources in addition to that investment. So we doubled down on NVIDIA and told Intel Capital no. But really picking those few, you're absolutely right. That's key. Because these partnerships, they do take nurturing. It's almost like a marriage. You can't ignore it.
Yeah, no shade to Intel Capital, by the way. If anyone's associated, we still love you. That's great advice. It's really important to double down, and partnerships take work. Yep. They're incredibly beneficial, but the reality is they do take work. So focus is really helpful, and I'm glad we could be helpful to you.
Thank
Absolutely. So let's look ahead to customer adoption and in the next 5 years. From an enterprise perspective, back to you, Lauren, do you see any major shifts in enterprise customer adoption happening with AI?
Oh, big time. I mean, it's obviously a lot of this is this conference. Azure obviously is an amazing set of enterprise customers that they're working with globally. Every enterprise is probably now also hiring a chief AI officer, right? And really thinking about how AI can transform every element of their workforce. What we're probably seeing most notably is a few things. One, a lot of the enterprises that we work with want very vertical specific partnerships as well as very horizontal specific partnerships. And so what I mean by that is, how can you specifically transform the way that my customer success team is operating today? How do I have fewer people into my contact center? How do I make sure that when I do have someone in the contact center, that call is as impactful, educated as it possibly can be? So really transforming their workforce, but also in a way that's very specific to their vertical, right? So if you think of the oil and gas example, which we were talking about with our friends at Cohere this week, the way that they think about their field technicians and allowing them to retrieve more information, quickly be able to troubleshoot tasks, it's very specific to oil and gas, right? And that's not something that you're going to talk to a marketing automation company about. So I think finding ways to not make AI so opaque and hyper-technical, but I think very solutions-oriented to either what their horizontal kind of functional use cases are or vertical use cases, is we're actually seeing people have the most traction with enterprise.
Got it, okay. Healthcare, Vibhor, same but different. You have a wide variety of customers. Talk about customer adoption. What does success look like for you?
Well, I think, like I said, already life sciences and healthcare is going through a paradigm shift, if I may use that phrase, where They are learning, they're coming up with new business models to work together. I shared an example of that earlier. But I think it's, to just build on Lauren's point there, I do agree, we're already seeing enterprises think very differently about AI-driven products versus generic software solutions. They are thinking about, how they're going to price or accept, prove a ROI, for instance, right? And is the ROI going to be proven based totally on the function of the product or based on the potential of the product, which it could grow into if you invested in it at that point in time and then did more R&D on together. So there's sort of collaborative ways of working that we are seeing at least pharmaceutical companies and health systems come up with. There are, of course, the usual early adopters who are driving this change, and then there are others who are following it. So that's one. But I think the most important stakeholder in this entire conversation, at least in my industry, is patients. I'm really enjoying seeing how patients are interacting with this and are sort of driving a lot of that change. To just give you a small example, the other day I was just talking to a patient advocacy group, and I was asking them, what do you make of all of this AI hype, if I may, right? And how do you see this translates for you? And one of them just came up and said, well, earlier I was prescribed a few medications. And now, and I was told, to do X, Y, and Z. And I just, I went out for a trip, and I had a bit of a drink, and I just wanted to know if that was still okay, with my medication. And I could not call my physician who was treating me. So usually I would just go on a search engine and look for that. But now, with some of these ChatGPT tools and things like that, I would just punch it in. So it's a very rudimentary example, but you can see how people, the general public, who are very far away from all the tech, are still sort of thinking about using that tech for their advantage. And to me, that's very interesting.
Absolutely. We're still customers, still consumers, even in healthcare, and I think the expectations are dramatically changing, absolutely. Yeah. Andrew, anything to add for you?
I would just say from the hospital's perspective, getting people to stop leaving. And by that I mean the doctors and nurses. We're shedding doctors and nurses on a daily basis, it seems like. So improving the experience sufficiently so that they stay, because AI, at least for the next 30 years, is not ever going to replace a doctor or a nurse. We need them, and we need a lot more of them for the aging population. So to avoid a scenario where we have literally people dying in the streets, I'd really like to see artificial intelligence make progress against that.
Yep. Got it. Thank you. We may have a couple of questions time for questions from the audience, but before we get there, for maybe 1 to 2 questions, rapid fire round. Lauren, if your startup had a mascot, what would it be?
I mean, it's a pine cone, obviously.
Yeah.
Or we call our employees pine nuts. It could also be a pine nut. But
that's fun.
It would probably be a nurse.
A nurse?
We do a lot for, I would say almost more for nurses than we do for physicians.
Amazing, okay.
A very happy, satisfied patient.
Okay, I'll take it. That'd be great. Okay, and if you could partner with any company in the world, I know we've covered partnerships quite a bit, any company in the world, doesn't have to be within your space even, who would it be? Get creative.
Besides NVIDIA?
Or Microsoft.
Anyone.
I mean, honestly, to think about doing those fewer partnerships well, I would not change who our partners are today. They're the AI leaders who are at the forefront of innovation and technology. From a customer perspective, there's every customer on the planet that I want to make sure that we're servicing, and I want to make sure that we can make AI extremely knowledgeable for any use case, any workflow, big or small.
So my ideal partnership, number 1, is still confidential, but we'll announce it in December.
Ooh, love that.
Which will be a game changer for healthcare.
It's exciting.
Is it in the healthcare space?
It's a major EMR vendor.
Give us a hint. Just kidding. We won't push.
I agree. I think for us as well, I think partnerships would have to be with people who are already part of the backbone of these infrastructures that are already in place, because that's what would lead to success at the point of care. Without disrupting everything that is already happening on the clinical or the technological side.
Got it. Great, thank you. Okay, do you have any questions in the audience? We have time for maybe 1, 2? If not, I've got one more fun rapid fire, and I will stick with it. Nothing? Okay. Last one. Imagine your AI is on a reality show. What challenge would it absolutely crush?
AI reality show.
That's right. You know what? Yeah, I had to integrate some AI, of course, into this. Perplexity gave me this one. There's my nod. Thanks.
I need to watch more reality TV is maybe what it is, so I have like better fodder for the answer to this question. What would they crush?
I only watch Below Deck, so I'm trying to think
Oh, you
of
do
a
watch Below Deck.
So good.
I'm sure there's a use case for AI there.
Yeah.
Does it have to be generic or?
You can make it whatever you want. Doesn't have to. You can make up the reality show if you want. Make it.
I mean, back to your sensors and your voice retrieval, et cetera, like you get the real dirt of what's happening in real time where, you know what I mean? So
We don't
you don't have to
reality.
wait for gossip after the fact. I'm sure your sensors could be used for that as well.
Yeah, it starts to get a little big brothery though.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd probably catch a lot more behind the scenes footage with computer vision and Below Deck.
All right, we're going to stick with that.
There's no better way to end this panel than that.
Perplexity did not fulfill on a question first. We love you, Perplexity, but okay. Every good story has an end, and this is the end. Oh, we have time for one very quick question. Speak loudly. Yep, data entry. Okay, what's the blocker for data entry, healthcare? Say that last part? To solving data entry.
Should we repeat the question for people online?
Yeah, what is the, data entry is not that hard, I'm not sure about that, but so what is the blocker to solving?
So a few things, integrations, getting the right infrastructure into hospitals. It's now not a hard problem, but it hasn't been a problem that hospitals even conceived solving. And so to some extent, the technology has now overnight, since ChatGPT was released, expanded its capabilities at almost an unfathomable rate. And it caught hospitals kind of by surprise. So now we're going through the validation process of, is it better than humans? Do we have the right hardware? Are there privacy concerns from listening ambiently? Is regulation going to allow us to do this? So it is absolutely not technology that's limiting that now. The technology is now far out past where we need it to be to solve that problem.
But security and compliance is not trivial. I mean, whether it's for healthcare or a lot of other use cases to retrieve information, and whether it's patient permissioning or customer permissioning, et cetera, like there's a lot of obstacles and red tape there that I think prevent a lot of our technology from broader adoption.
Can I just give an example of that? In the clinic, when you've seen a patient, you're supposed to take notes about the patient and record that within whatever system you're using. And following that, you have staff, administrative staff, who are supposed to attach billing codes to that patient's record, because that's how then you get reimbursed from the payers. Just that process is very well defined, and to Andrew's point, the technology is there. But when you actually look, and we've done this time and again, you see over 50 to 60% of the patients being miscoded, in spite of the information being there and the process being there. So you can see it's it's not a data entry sort of process problem, but it's just like, how do you audit it? How do you make sure it's been done right? And how do you reconcile that information? And I think that's where some of these technologies can help us sort of speed up and do that effectively so that it doesn't disrupt, to my earlier point, the existing workflows, which I think is very critical.
Okay, I think we have been cut off from our online audience. If we have not yet, then I want to thank them for being here. Thank you to our panel. We'll take another question live in the room. Go ahead.
And Andrew, probably. So you kind of touched upon the right problem. The data that is available for AI to learn is actually siloed in these large systems like, the big EMR that you mentioned and all those things. So how do you make it available to wider audience to do more AI learning and research? Because this, kind of taking out the PII data and make the raw narratives and whatever summaries available.
I'll give my perspective, but I think this is more in Andrew's court. You see, we as a business made a conscious decision not to train our models on patient data for those very reasons, for privacy and compliance reasons, and which is why we went completely the other route to build them on the basis of clinical guidelines that we would use in the clinic, because then there's a standard, and two physicians of the same expertise can agree on that standard. What we found was where guidelines were not available, there working with patient data and building these predictive models was okay, because then you could have a research, sort of a debate around the research that was done and what the outputs were, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, but to answer your question directly, you do need that infrastructure to make that happen. You're absolutely right. We have seen, and this is why the early adopters in our experience have been the ones who are sort of have already started on that infrastructure journey, back to our earlier discussion, who have invested in Microsoft or NVIDIA and these kinds of big infrastructure technologies to at least allow for these use cases to be thought about and be implemented. So yes, I mean, it all begins over there. It all begins with this, with the thinking that, okay, we have to do this. And again, to my earlier point, it's not like, oh, if we do this today, we're going to get a benefit, tomorrow. Yes, we need that, but with a view of, okay, what's the 5-year or the 10-year plan? And that's the paradigm shift I was talking about. I've seen a lot of, like, the head of strategy now is a very serious role in enterprises whose sole job is to look at exactly these things, the near term and the short term, the short term and the long term benefits.
In a word, you anonymize the data. That's it.
Boom.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the thing is, the anonymized data is not available, and there is no easy way to anonymize the data that is locked in these systems. That's my point. Yeah.
Yeah, so that comes down to partnerships. So you partner and access anonymized data. By anonymizing it, it's easier to get the partnership done.
Great. Thank you. I think we can chat after if you want to. I think they'll cut us off, but well, go ahead.
So you talked about the large EMR, right? You talked about data, garbage, garbage out. How do you work across EMRs, right? Because it's most likely to get speed and service to your patients, right? Like you got to break down those silos. So how are you from like the universal API? So does it readily matter, this hospital's EMR is this, but I'm going from, Florida, doing a new thing. Here's my EMR record, but it's in Joe's, not Johnny's. How quickly can it get imported, or am I just out of luck in today's society? Does that limit you guys, right?
So we, I'm going to do a plug for Microsoft, if I may.
Yeah,
At this point, we have found this new data model that they've come up with through Fabric to be very useful for that. But we are trying it right now, because you're absolutely right. Even within a large health system, we are finding there could be sites on different EMRs, to your point. But the the health system wants to do this at a central level. So how do you, and this relates to the earlier question, how do you bring the data into a common data format or a data model for us to then be able to review all of that data and do everything that that we were discussing earlier? And that's where I think these common data models, and the concept of common data models has been around for a long time. It's just that getting consensus on what is exactly the data model that will be common is not there yet. So people have tried FHIR, HL7, they have tried OMOP for research, as you know, and now there's Fabric, which is another one, which is supposed to be able to convert everything, quote unquote, to the HL7 FHIR format, so that it could be, at a standard where you can then sort of work with it. And that is a huge bonus for companies like us, because then we don't have to build these individual connectors and adapters to individual systems. And it really reduces, to my starting point, that operational cost that otherwise we have to take the hit on of getting ourselves sort of integrated into the ecosystem, as it was.
Yeah, basically what he said, it's going to be FHIR. So FHIR will be the thing that makes it easier to interoperably move your data around. But right now, it's really controlled by the EMRs. When you're in one EMR system, going from Florida to Chicago, the data is transferable immediately, already right now. But the data will then follow you around and live inside the healthcare systems. You can obviously access your own records, but a company can't all of a sudden just access your records from Florida because they're working with the health system in Chicago. But FHIR will standardize all of this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Before they drag us out,
Thank you.
if you have questions, you're still in the audience, please feel free to approach us. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.